the writer that I sort of fell in love with as a writer, and I read a lot of stuff before that happened, but is Ernest Hemingway. And
Mm.
there's a lot about Hemingway not to love, frankly, but those short declarative sentences, that spareness of writing that conveyed such power and depth and elegance in simplicity was so breathtaking to me. So he inspired me. But that's how I've always loved to write. And I have to say, Kate, writing for me, it's different from being an author. You know that you're a published author of I think 8 books. Don't you have 8 books? I think you do. So
I'm working on my 8th. Yeah, yeah.
okay, you're working on your 8th.
Yeah.
And I'll allow my envy to just sort of float away right now. But writing, and it may be the same for you. Writing and authoring are kind of different. So writing for me is a spiritual discipline or spiritual practice. I don't like the word discipline as much. I really connect with the holy every day through scripture and writing as a kind of a prayer.
Mm.
And I can't imagine not writing. I can easily imagine not publishing anymore. I mean, it's I do just because I want to help. I want to be helpful. But writing is praying in a lot of ways for me. So a long-winded answer, but that's really sort of how I got started and the why of why I continue to do it.
Remarkable. It's not long-winded. That's what we want to hear. Yeah. Well, and tell us about this particular book, this book about hope. How did you come to feel that this needed to be? You said when you publish, it's because you want to help people. What about this book is helping people?
I'll kind of steal a phrase from Rob Bell, whose earlier work I like very much, and whose latest book I read, but I didn't quite connect as much with it as his previous stuff. That's not to say don't read it, because it's certainly worth a read. In an earlier book, whose title I've just forgotten right off the top of my head, sorry, Rob talks about the ache of the world and being attuned to that. And I think if you read various people, Richard Rohr or Henry Nouwen or that sort of writer, you hear them not necessarily use that word, but they lead us, and very fruitfully, I think, to lean into our sense of solidarity with the suffering and the pain of the world. And that in a way is taking up our cross and following Christ. Yeah. And that's when we see that we're in this together, that then we are participating in the divine healing of the cosmos, right? I don't mean to sound too highfalutin, but I think that's the thing, that this is when the presiding bishop talks about love, that's the love that I think he's talking about. I think that he's talking about God loving the world back into wholeness through us, right? Through his beloved children. So I wrote this book, I hope, participating in that by listening as carefully as I could to the ache of the world. It's not some abstract exercise where I say, well, here's one of the theological concepts. What does hope mean? I don't really function like that. I connect to people, and I grew increasingly aware, and this is before we were hit with the coronavirus pandemic, that we were already in a pandemic. I became aware of that, and it was a threefold pandemic. But and I'll say more about that in a moment. But the first thing that I was struck by was our aggression. Or you could say violence. And I don't just mean, although I do mean, I don't just mean the violence of mass shootings, which are terrible. But we're aggressive with one another. We just saw it the other day. A road rage that gets a 5-year-old boy killed.
I know, terrible.
That kind of aggression, but that same aggression that we turn on ourselves, because our suicide rates are mounting. My son, my eldest, is a veteran, and so I'm of combat, and so I'm very attuned to the very high suicide rates among returning veterans. But it's across the board. It's across the board. So aggression, I noticed that it's mounting, and that we're in the grips of it, and we're in the grips of addiction. The addiction rates, and along with that, of course, the overdose deaths that are mounting. I serve on various kinds of recovery ministry boards and groups, but along with that, there's also a sort of epidemic of anxiety and depression, and all of these things, it seemed to me, were connected. I got to tell you that the one thing that really, the suicides were getting my attention, and this is going to sound like I'm a fanboy, and it's because I am. I loved Anthony Bourdain. Right?
It was amazing. Yeah.
Oh gosh, right? And Parts Unknown, I was just glued to that thing, right? I loved that show. And he could be kind of a not such a nice guy, but still fascinating show. And it's clearly not just about food, but it's about people in different cultures. It was fascinating. And he was exactly the same age I was when he took his own life, when he died by suicide. And it just knocked me over. It just knocked me over. And so I began to ask myself, what's going on here? Why are we in this? What's up? And there are a lot of folks writing right now. David Brooks, for example, is one of them. Stephanie Esfahani Smith is another, who are writing about a crisis of meaning in life. In the 20th century, the great psychotherapist, logotherapist, Viktor Frankl, talked about man's search for meaning. And he pointed out in that lovely book, Survivor of Concentration Camps, here are the symptoms of a crisis of meaning. The very things I've just named, that threefold pandemic that we're in, are a symptom of an underlying crisis of meaning. And I read that as, because I'm a Christian and I've got my own vocabulary, right? Actually, there's a crisis of hope, right? Underneath all of these things is a sense of despair. Yeah. And my understanding of hope sort of emerged from all of that as the felt sense that life is really worth living. Let me tell you how I got there. I'll tell you, it's, as I've reflected on Anthony Bourdain, and some other really prominent suicides, and also some overdoses that broke my heart. It may sound sort of dark that I was reflecting on suicide, but as a pastor, I mean, I know you've dealt with suicides and the heartache of families and so forth. And you hear the question again and again and again: why? Why did they take their lives? Why did they die by suicide? And as I contemplated that, I realized, wait a minute, there's another question that actually suicide brings to the fore. Because if we're able to decide that life isn't worth living, the flip of it is also true. We decide that life is worth living.
That's true.
That sort of hit me in the face. Oh, well, wait, there's a fundamental question, right? Why is life worth living? Right? So what I came to is we're creatures that have to have a why. This is part of our being the free beings that we are, that we need a why. And that, Frankl says it in Man's Search for Meaning, and believe it or not, Friedrich Nietzsche said it in the 19th century. We can go through anything as long as we have a why. And so I started digging for, well, what's the why? Okay. And different people are going to have different things. Some people say their kids, or somebody with a career. But what's a why that gets you through anything? And the reason I ask that, as you know, Kate, and any of you who have read my stuff, my mom survived Mauthausen, Gusen concentration camp. And I became especially interested in why people could not merely survive, like, get through and dodge the bullet of Nazi brutality, huh? But I mean, how did they really live? Because there's in Dachau, for example, there was the saying, going to the wire. Those concentration camps had really high voltage wires around them to prevent escape. And people, lots of people, decided, they'd whisper to one another, "I'm going to the wire tonight." And they didn't mean I'm going to try to escape. They were saying, "I can't take this anymore."
Mm-hmm.
And they would throw themselves against the wire in order to die rather than live through this. So why did people decide not to? Okay, where did that choice come from? And the theme running throughout the book for me is, what really makes life worth living is loving. And our capacity to love is drawn not from, and I know some people say you have to love yourself first, and that's fine. I'm not going to quibble about that. But I think even deeper that, and I've really felt this a lot through the pandemic. I feel loved by God. I mean, and the more, the more I look myself in the mirror and am able to say, "Well, you're a screw up, Buster." You're really kind of screwed up. You've done some dumb stuff, and thoughts pass through your head now, even today, that to steal a line from my friend Anne Lamott, would make Jesus want to drink gin straight from the cat dish. I mean, it's and it's in that place where I'm falling on my face, right, that I realize, well, God hasn't given up on me yet, now has he?
Mm.
That's a powerful source of my sense that life is worth living, because I'm the beloved. And my response to that is to love. And loving, see, is what makes my life worth living. I'm not all that near retirement yet. But I got to tell you, being bishop is not what makes my life worth living. I'd be perfectly happy to go work at, I don't know, Home Depot and water the plants.
Sure.
Because that's, like Brother Lawrence slicing the carrots, right? That's prayer.
Right.
Right. That's adding to the universe. So what that was, I got way past the question you asked, Kate, but it's relationship, isn't it? It's all about relationship. It's about our relationship with God, our relationship with one another. And that's where all my writing comes from. I mean, it's, I'm reading, I read Rohr too much. I just do. And
He's awesome.
I'm reading this. Isn't he awesome? Yeah, I love him. I'm reading the latest thing now that's really kind of a reworking of stuff you've read before if you've read Rohr, but it's the wisdom path or something like that. And there he talks about the cosmic egg. And I got to tell you, I really hate that phrase. It sounds so goofy, but what he's getting at is really, really great. And it's that, our story is, my story is in our story is in the story, is what that means. And I thought, of course he articulates everything so much better than I can, but that's what I'm trying to do when I'll tell any particular story about me or us or whatever, is to make all those connections, to show how any story about my life would hopefully resonate with you, that you've got something like that, and it gets you going about your story. And our stories aren't just our stories, they're in the great story, the great story of God's just unfathomable love for the creation,
an unfathomable love for those who have died and for those who are alive. But this book is primarily for people that find themselves alive here and want to find hope in that, right?
Yes.
Tell us more about your mom. And she's just such an amazing woman in this book, and what she's been through, and then, running away from an abusive husband and living almost homeless. tell us about what it was like to be the son of such a woman of incredible inner strength and resilience, but also someone who is going through so much.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I really, I think about my mom every day. By the way, she was my first funeral.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness, that's a tough one.
my mom was my first funeral. Well, so, something as a friend of mine said, well, that's the lovely final gift you could give your mother.
Mm.
And it was, it was, and that's for another story for another day. But first of all, I was such a goof as a young man, and I guess we all can look back on our youth and recognize what you didn't know, right? I mean, for me, mom was just mom.
Mhm.
I didn't even. She never talked about being. I mean, I knew she had survived Mauthausen, because she said she didn't talk. I mean, she didn't want me to have to experience that. She didn't want me to know about that kind of suffering and that kind of abuse and horror. And I'll tell you what, as I look back, I took my mother so for granted because she was always there when I needed her, and she was always on my side. And I never for one moment wondered if my mother loved me, ever. Not even for a moment. I'll tell you, something about the concentration camp in a moment. I want to share a story that I shared in the book, and that I put out there on my blog, just so people get a taste of the book. When I was really little, my mom, I guess I was preschool, right? I wasn't even in kindergarten then. Mom would spread a blanket, she called it a pallet, out on the backyard as the sun was going down. This was our bedtime ritual. She'd spread it out there, and we'd lie on the blanket and wait for the stars to come out. We'd point them out. She'd point them out. And I would wake up the next day, not remembering having fallen asleep, and there I'd be in my bed. Of course, she carried me, right? But we'd watch those stars come out and gaze at them together, and she would tell me stories of the old country, and she would sing to me. She would sing in German and in English. And she said, clouds would pass over, and she'd say, even when clouds are above your head and you can't see the stars, they're still there shining. Those stars are still shining. That was my mother's very early. My mom wasn't well educated. She finished gymnasium, which is high school in Austria, and she was trained. So she wasn't. She didn't take the courses to go into university. She took courses to be at work when got out of high school, and so she wasn't theologically trained or a literary person, but she was teaching me about hope. She didn't use the word hope. My mom was spiritual but not religious before people said that. She, like 98% of Austria, she was Roman Catholic, and certainly the nuns and the priests had huge formational influence on her. But I never asked her about this, but I can't really imagine emerging from the concentration camp wanting to go to mass again, to be perfectly honest. I think it would, but she certainly had the profound sense that God was with her all the time, and that God was with me all the time. There was never any question for her about, and for that matter, Christ, right? And look, the German and Austrian religious scene, they bought into the whole Nazi stuff. So why would you trust that? I mean, I wouldn't have. Sure. I certainly wouldn't have. Yeah. One of the things that I did on my sabbatical as I was working on this book is to go to Mauthausen for the first time. And because my mom survived the place. We got our own personal guide who
Wow.
walked us through everything, and his goal was to help us as see it through her eyes. So walked us into the camp where and also where she was initially lined up, and then where she was marched to get her hair shorn, and here's where here, or it's left there as a memorial. By the way, it's interesting to know that was the territory held by the Russians, and they would only depart that with the agreement that would be a perpetual monument to the people who had died there, and a reminder of what had happened, so that it would never happen again. But I have to say, walking those grounds, that changed my perspective of my mom. Even though I had been digging into a whole lot of Holocaust stuff for years now, actually walking that territory, walking those grounds, hearing very specific stories about the brutality, the misery, the just the unfathomable cruelty. That was my mom. 14, 15-year-old girl forced to, brought there on train, marched 2.5 miles up a very steep incline, lined up against a wall, and made, along with all of the others, to strip completely and stand in the freezing cold, being nipped at by dogs, slapped by guards. And, imagine that's your mom. That's my mom. And so I look back on that same woman who endured abuse at my father's hands, pretty unspeakable abuse, frankly. I think, God, what a pretty tough customer my mom was, But my mom loved people, and she remained, oddly naive. She just was going to trust people again and again. It used to drive me nuts. I tell you another thing she drove me nuts about my mom. It was like, Mom, tomorrow's another day, right? You got to take the good with the bad. Like,
She would say that to you.
Mom. Yeah. And I look back on it now, and I recognize I totally misunderstood her. I totally misunderstood her. You got to take the good with the bad. My mom's saying this is a mixed world. All right. And we inhabit this mixed world, and we need to love in the midst of that. And you don't try to eradicate the bad. Right. We don't blame. We don't use violence to get rid of the violent. We live a different way, is what she was saying to me, and saying to me that tomorrow's another day. She didn't mean just, it'll get better tomorrow. What she meant was, stay in today. Today is worth living, right? Tomorrow's worries are tomorrow's worries, says Jesus, right? And said my mom, look, just stay in the day, dude. This, no matter how hard it is right now, this is going to be worth it. And in retrospect, what I think she's saying is, if you love, Jake, right, it gives you a fierce determination to continue, to stay at it, don't give up. And that's my mom. And yeah, we were homeless. There's different kinds of homeless, right? Living in a car is homeless, which we did. In another book, I described what it was like must have been like for. We were hungry, and we were down to about 12 cents, right?
Wow.
And my mom went to the back of a restaurant and begged for some food, and they gave her a partial loaf of bread and some peanut butter. And I just ate, I was a kid. But I was thinking, there's a woman that was a hard worker her whole life, right? And wanted nothing more than to provide, frankly, for me. That's how she was. And that would have been humiliating.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't let that. But I suppose really, when you get right down to it, her humility prevented her from feeling humiliated. Right. And that's I don't know if I'm there, to be honest. I don't know. I don't know that I am.
Well, Jake, how old, when did she die, and how much of your life did she get to see before she died?
She died in 1995. In fact, she was 66 years old. I was not, I wasn't a bishop or anything. And so she didn't see our youngest son, Patrick, born. Joy was pregnant with him when she died. But I will tell you another story if you don't mind.
Please.
My daughter, Meredith, really was a God note to Meredith. And I'll tell you why. Both my older brother and my younger sister, Marie, Joseph and Marie, died. And my mother, I remember Marie's death. I was 3. And my mother talked a lot about Marie. It was clearly a loss that she bore to her grave. And she used to talk about her little girl, missing her little girl. And I remember one Christmas, we were staying over at my in-laws' home, and Mom came to join in, and she pulled up to the carport, and I was opening the door, and Meredith ran to the door with her arms wide open. Just in the way that was so Meredith at the time. Oma, 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 Oma. Oma is, grandma German.
Right.
And the look on my mother's face, in that moment, she had her little girl.
Yeah.
That healing moment was so profound. And I got to see it. Right? I got to see it. And it's a simple thing, I suppose, but deep. So, I say, I share that story because part of what I want to share with people, and I think the root of hope is that God is in all of those moments. There's not a time that God isn't around. That's what my mom taught me. It's what that moment with Meredith and my mom reminded me. Now, we're not aware, are we? I mean, that's a big job to try to be as aware as we can, and we're finite, and we'll get distracted or just too self-absorbed or whatever. But our capacity to feel hope is connected to our capacity to be aware of God's presence. And I think, in that book that I told you about, Rohr's writing, one of the lines he uses that I really like is that nobody can do your spiritual homework for you. I'm probably misquoting it, but and it's like what Ronner said: if there are going to be Christians in the future, they're going to be mystics. And what that means, for me at least, is not that they're going to be the great mystics like Julian or who has these revelations of the divine love and writes them down, kind of thing. But nobody's doing your spiritual homework for you. You really do encounter the risen Christ in your life, right? More than that, you don't just see the risen Christ. You feel the love poured into you because you're participating in the love. You know the love when you're loving. That's a paradox, isn't it, right? That you really know you're loved when you're giving the love away.
Yeah.
I guess you never have to worry about me filling up an hour, do you, Kate? So anyway.
No, in fact, that's perfect, because I was going to ask you about that, Jake. How would you define a mystic? And you're saying um, that you believe that that Christians are going to have to experience divine love on their own. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Is that what you mean by mystic? Can you
Yes.
explain more about how do we begin to be mystics then?
Yeah. Well, I think there's no one way, right? I don't have a toolbox or the 7 habits of a successful mystic from the Bible kind of thing. It's old stuff, isn't it? There's nothing new, really. There's really not. Um, it, being willing to take time where you're going to be still, and you're going to be quiet, and you're going to pay attention. Actually, the only tool I can think of is calendaring, right? Where you actually, or scheduling, where you actually say, well, we do that with prayer book, don't we? I mean, we have the offices, and that's meant to sort of give the day a rational, or rather a holy structure, huh? And so that we pray the hours, but I don't, it doesn't. I don't even mean that it has to be something that formal. I'll give you an example. We have an outdoor cat, and the reason he's outdoor is that he just insists, uh, but he just hangs in the yard mostly, or goes across the street and possesses the front porch of the across the street house. And he's a great cat. But the truth of the matter is, there are tons of cats in our neighborhood that are just like that. But we live in a pretty wild place, and so like I hear foxes barking in the morning, and raccoons and possums and other cats. And so what I've found is, if I don't sit out on the porch with him, and it's before the sun comes up, right? If I don't sit out on the porch with him, something else is going to eat his food. So he and I basically said morning prayer this morning out on the porch and that kind of thing. And I did it on my iPhone so I could see it. But before any of that, the moon this morning was huge. It was just at the horizon, sort of glowing through the branches of a pine tree, and there were some wisps of cloud across it, and it just froze me in my tracks. And I allowed myself to just stop and feel it, to feel the softness of that light, to hear some birds starting to awaken, and in that moment, not be so sophisticated and fancy pants that I couldn't feel the love that I was getting, and the sense that I am a part of all of this, that all of this is here. And so that's just those simple things. And you and I were chatting the other day, and I talked to you about my dog.
Yeah, Gracie.
Yeah, Gracie. Good memory that you remember her name, Gracie. Yesterday was my day off, and I'm going to confess that I rarely really take them. Life just so presses in, what that's like. But I really took it yesterday, and so I said to Gracie, "Why don't we go watch TV?" And we got on the bed, and I lay down, and she kind of came and put her head on my lap, and we just lay there, right? I fell asleep for part of the time. I'm sure, and I know she did. And that simple, loving relationship makes me aware. But I love her so much it hurts, And I can say the same for my kids. I can say the same for my grandchildren. I can say the same for Joy. Joy asked me the other night before we were going to sleep, we were talking about the kind of people we like to be with. And I wasn't trying to get it over on her when I responded with this, but it just came out of my mouth out before I could think. She talked about she really likes quirky, kind of liminal people. I mean, Joy is really, she works, she's really our kind of community engagement person. I mean, it really works among the poor and the disenfranchised. And I, she was talking about that, and she, well, who do you like to be with? And it came right out of my mouth. You.
Oh.
You.
Mhm.
And then, and I really mean this, and then whoever shows up.
Mm.
Whoever shows up. And I didn't pre-think that. That just kind of rolled out. So for me, that's an everyday mystic. You know, can you see the deep mystery within things? Can you see not only that, and I think the deeper we go, see, you'll see it first when you go wow to a sunrise or wow to that moonrise or moon setting. But I think the deeper you go in it, the more you let yourself go to it, the more you realize that you're being seen, you're being addressed. It's not only, oh, this is beautiful. In fact, that's what beauty is. Beauty isn't just, oh, I like it. That's one level of engaging beauty. But if you're really in the presence of the beautiful, and for me, that's it can certainly be an art, but nature always outdoes art. It's for me, others maybe not. If you're in the presence of beauty, it's taking hold of you. Something beyond you is addressing you.
Yes.
Right? And that's only going to happen as we surrender to it, or as we let go to it. And so I guess the final thing I'd say about that sort of everyday mysticism stuff is the more we have the courage to be vulnerable, the more we have the courage to let go, and frequently that's letting go of the things that we think make us safe.
Yeah.
The more that holy gets in, all right, or at least we notice it. The more we recognize our yearning, because then we become so aware that, oh, it's the yearning we all share, isn't it? It's that all of that pain that makes some people doubt the existence of God. If we'll be compassionate, we recognize, oh, that's what Jesus was doing on the cross. Yeah, embracing that pain, and by embracing it, healing it. So, I don't mean to get too, in a way, I don't want to get overly religious with mysticism. Here I am with a purple shirt and a stinking pectoral cross on. So, it's like, ooh, that's religious. But I want to be able to say, I have a disabled granddaughter, whom I was just adoring through a picture this morning. And Addie, my heart, right? That's, by the way, that's the Addie of if you look at it, Addie and Bennett are the ones to whom I dedicated the grandchildren.
Yeah.
It's important to me to recognize that Addie, who is profoundly disabled, experiences that presence quite profoundly. And maybe, more so than I do.
Maybe. Yeah. Well, Jake, tell us, you talk a bit about certainty and how certainty can damage faith, how it can be, sometimes it actually puts an obstacle in front of us, certainty. Can you unpack that a bit more for us?
Oh, yes. Thank you. I think that's, and I have to say, in one way, anything I say, I've been taught really ultimately by great teachers. And I think, Rohr is one of them. Peter Enns is one of them. Thomas Aquinas is one of them. And I'll start with Thomas Aquinas, who is really good about saying, you're finite, God's infinite. Let's be clear about that. Anything you think ever is always a finite thought about the infinite. Wow. Don't get ahead of yourselves, right? And so if you can make an idol out of your all too human thought processes,
wow,
and you can insist that this is how it must be, the other piece, he says you know God by analogy, and he's very rational. But that phrase I used earlier in our conversation, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
It's always that you don't know what you don't know. That's what it is to be a human being. You don't know what you don't know, ever. You're going to be in a place, you are never going to be in a place where you got it all, right? There's always, in fact, so much that you don't know, that once you, and haven't you had the experience when you take in more context, that what you've been looking at looks different? You go, oh, wish I'd known that before, right? Well, when's that not going to be the case? Right? You've got to always be open to there being more God than you got your head around. All right. Or else I'm not so sure it's God you're talking about. Right. There's years ago, there was a great PBS series called The Shock of the New. It was about the turn of the 20th century, late 19th century, turn of the 20th century painters. And so the Expressionists, the Impressionists, the Van Gogh, and so forth. One of the theories was, that's when train travel had really, really taken hold, and people were moving at a rate they'd never been moving at before. It's the first time they ever saw a moving landscape at that clip, right? And in particular, if you stood on the platform of the back car and you watched the train, or the landscape as the train moved behind you, you'd keep seeing the landscape, right? Move. And it drove home the idea that, what you're seeing isn't stable, and it's always being made by a context that's yet to add more to the context. You're going to see something new if you allow yourself to see it. Now, that's really discomforting. I get it. I really get that. That's, we can't really always stay in that place. I mean, that's why mystics sometimes take on a bad odor to the institutional church, is that they're always reminding us about what we don't know, right? But if we're going to, let's put it this way, we do the creed every Sunday, yeah. Now, of course, I do the Apostles' Creed more than the Nicene, because I'm a confirming machine, right? Yeah. But it's perfectly possible to cling to the Nicene Creed's articulation of the Trinity in such a way that you've made an idol out of it. And you're not really rubbing up against God much. Yeah. You can be so insistent about this or that doctrine, or about this or that reading of Scripture, that you what's become important to you is that you're right about this way of putting it, as opposed to that becoming the way the community has gifted you with lenses to see what's hard to see. All right. And so for me, I don't want to down on anybody. I don't want to criticize or anything like that. But I think we all have seen examples of kind of fundamentalisms that really have become almost, they're closer to ideologies.
Yeah.
Than they are humble reliance upon a power beyond you, that's greater than you, that gives you life. And that's what I'm getting at about what can happen with certainty, because you're actually not doing faith anymore. Faith, for me at least, let me tell you this. Oh my gosh, here goes, I went through the story again. The desert mothers and fathers, one way of looking at them is that they were these sort of muscular spiritual types. And I think you're just utterly missing it if you don't recognize another dimension of them. Although I have to say, they were pretty remarkable. They spent hours in their cells wrestling with their demons, and the idea, I think, some take away from that is, and one day they'll overcome them. Well, if you actually read what they're about, what you'll find out is they're about allowing themselves to come to the place where they lose the struggle. and they're flat on their face, and they recognize the necessity in their own lives of mercy and grace. They can't do it on their own. You know, in sort of recovery terms, they've hit the bottom.
Yeah.
Where all you got left is help, help, help. I think, you know, there's the cornerstone of faith for me. And if we're certain we don't actually need God, right? Oh, I saw Emmy's note
Thank
there.
you, Emmy.
So good to see you. Great to see you. Love you. Love you.
Oh. Yeah, what a beautiful thought that we are, in essence, we can become trapped in our own certainty, and that's not faith. That's a rigidity. That faith involves unknowing. It has to involve unknowing.
Don't you think?
Be faith. Yeah.
It does seem to me that, and that's scary though, right? I mean,
It is.
I sort of saw it in action once. Joy Meredith and I, Patrick may have been along, but I think it was just the two of us. We ate at some restaurant down by a bayou. And I mean, of course, what restaurant's not by a bayou in Louisiana, right? But so after we ate lunch, we walked out on it was kind of a dock, but really more of a wooden path that'll take you kind of out into the bayou a bit. And I grabbed Meredith right before she stepped on a bad place in it, you know, because she'd have just gone right down. And it struck me that, you know, a lot of people like to say, you got to stand on your own 2 feet, and that's what certainty I think is. You got to stand on your own 2 feet. And what I recognized there was, you know, that's putting a whole lot of emphasis on you standing on your own 2 feet, right? And that what you think is really, really strong is you. The truth is, you're only as strong as the thing that holds you up.
Right.
And that you're never going to be able to build anything that can really ultimately hold you up. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book as well, is that we do, and you use a kind of a Tillich approach. Even atheists have faith, whether they want to call it that or not. They're going to have what Tillich called an ultimate concern, right? In other words, we're all going to have a why.
Yes.
We're all going to stand on something. And the real challenge for us, the faith challenge for all humans, is well, what is that? Yeah. And is it worthy of your worship? Is it really? Is it the thing that, and I guess for me, it's is it going to love you back? And does it already love you? Right? In a celebrity culture like we've got right now, celebrity is never going to love you back. In fact, it puts you on a treadmill that just doesn't stop.
No, right.
You know, it's, what have you done for me lately?
Right.
It's not going to hold your hand on your deathbed, or come visit you when you're lonely. So yeah.
Well, tell us about, you talked about resilience and resilient love. What does resilient love look like to you? Well, certainly your mother is a great example. But can you give us some more thoughts about that?
Oh yeah. Well, I told this story about the little dog in my neighborhood, who is it really looks like kind of an unruly ball of fur. My approach to dogs on my walk is, if they come running out at you and they're barking, I talk to them. Right. In fact, I did it again recently with a dog that's clearly just been rescued and abused, and I can't remember that dog's name, but it was a much bigger dog. than this little dog name in the book. But she came running out. And there were two of them, two rescues. One had been in the home longer. This one was clearly, you can tell by a dog's bark that they're afraid of you, and that's why they're barking at you. And they're and a little aggressive. And I talked gently to this dog. One of the things I said to the dog, who finally was willing to smell my hand, was, see, not all humans are jerks. We're not all mean. We're not all out to hurt you. And the new dog friend, I think, was sort of taken aback that I took a risk on that dog. But the point I made in the book is also, now, what would I have done if that had been a pit bull or a Rottweiler? Now, it happens I don't have the prejudices against those breeds that some people do, but I'm also aware that they're big and powerful.
Yeah.
And they're going to press my fear button a whole lot more. And the challenge, that resilient love idea, is, will you keep at giving love even when you might get bitten? And the example, another Holocaust example I give in the book is Eddie, E-T-T-Y, Eddie Hillesum, who is a Dutch Jew, who I won't say a whole lot about her other than to say, she was remarkable. And rather than flee, which would have been perfectly understandable when the Nazis rolled into Holland, she stayed to care for her people, her fellow Dutch folk and fellow Jewish folk. And she died in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And she, even in the midst of all of that, she just kept loving other people. And that, for me, Kate, I don't want to, let me tell you something. When you talk about something like, and I know I'm right at the edge of guilt tripping when I talk about resilient love as if it's something you need to achieve. And I don't mean to get that across at all. It's not like God said, now go love people, and I'm going to watch how well you do it. And if you don't do it well enough, I ain't loving you back. Right? God never said that, never suggested that. Jesus never embodied that. But what I want to say is, when you have that sense of being the beloved, it gives your love a resilience that will shock you. That you can keep on loving, even in the face of rejection, even in the face of sadness. I said this to my clergy the other day, when we gathered. And this is a nutty thing to say, but, sometimes you say nutty stuff to get people thinking. We make a deal out of the martyrs, of course, as we should. And I imagine them in the Colosseum, not a pleasant place to be, obviously. In fact, horrifying. And I think one interpretation of them is that they have such faith in the afterlife that they're willing to endure the suffering of being torn apart by wild beasts, or however they would meet their earthly end. And I suggested this to my clergy. I want you to think of them as so experiencing the living Christ in their lives that the lives that they could have right there on the sand of the Colosseum, about to be, and even being attacked by wild animals, was so far beyond the life of the spectators that they knew that as real life in such a way that they would never have traded places. That they recognized what they'd be giving up right there and then. And that, yes, that has an eternal arc, and they know that kind of life doesn't end. It grows and grows and grows on into eternity and infinity. But that's what I invited folks to see, that's that everyday mysticism, that being a new creation in Christ. Thank you, Paul. And by the way, Twitter apparently had a Paul sort of blow up yesterday or the day before that. And I'm ever so glad I missed it. I'm not much of a Twitter guy, but I did see the sort of the debris from it. But at any rate, Paul says this, and I think it's a profound thing to think about. Oh, I'm already inhabiting a life that I wouldn't trade. I wouldn't trade this Jesus-shaped, Jesus-defined, Jesus-indwelled life to escape some momentary pain. All right. And that doesn't diminish the pain. It would have been quite miserable. Yeah. But to think about, what I've talked to folks who are new in recovery about is I tell them, it works for me anyway, and I've been at it a long time, but I say, look, remember your bottom. Remember how miserable that was, and foster your memory of how god awful that was, how God forsaken you felt, right? And so every time, if you have some sense that you're moving toward the first drink, or these days a lot of opiates are the problem, right? Don't depend upon your will so much. Remember where that's going to go, right? It's going back to that thing you can remember, and that's that God-forsaken place. You're not really God-forsaken, but you can't sense God at all. Mm-hmm. It's so dark there.
Yeah.
Do you really want to trade this life for that life? No matter what's, you may have suffered a terrible loss, or a humiliation, or a disappointment, or a betrayal. Those things come in life, don't they? But do you trade that for this? And that's the kind of thing I'm pointing out with the Colosseum experience, is that this everyday mysticism thing is about saying, I experience being loved by Christ here and now. It's not to dismiss that I believe in the life after life. I'm going to see my sister and my brother and my mom. That's going to be great, right? And my dogs, all that other stuff. But I also sense them now.
Right. But that life is alive now. Oh, thank you so much, Jake. Thank you. Well, I hope everybody's going to get a chance to read your book as I have. It's just rich. And now I want to go back and read your other book, which you told me about, which I didn't know about, your first book, which is called, tell us about that, what the title of that is again, Jake?
That one's, and not to brag, but it's actually the fifth book. But the yeah. And believe me, the first one you want to read, it was a philosophy book, unless you really need a good night's sleep. Don't worry about that one. But the one the two Abingdon books, the one you've read, and A Resurrection Shaped Life. And they are paired.
Life. Okay.
They are, even though it's not part one and part two, they work together.
Yeah.
They are.
Okay.
They are related.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm going to get that one too.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this rich hour, and you were just such a blessing, such a blessing to us. Would you give us an Episcopal blessing, since we have a bishop with us? Would you bless us before we go?
I am honored. I'll give you I'll pronounce the blessing that I use every Sunday, then.
Thank you.
If that's good with you.
Yeah.
God be in your head and in your understanding. God be in your eyes and in your looking. God be in your mouth and in your speaking. God be in your heart and in your thinking. God be at your end and at your departing. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you this day and remain with you forevermore.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you all. Oh, thank you, Kate. Thank you all.
Have a great day, everybody.
With you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.